When Italy joined the war 10 June 1940 on the Axis side, the Regia Aeronautica shipped Breda 65s to North Africa for use against the British, but they also proved vulnerable. By February 1940, one British fighters had shot down most of the Italian planes. 41. In Morocco on 11 November 1942, American Curtiss P-40 Warhawks shot down 15 Ju-87DS in one encounter. 42. The United States Army Air Forces took delivery of a few North American P-51 Mustangs from a British order, but, as there were no funds to buy more fighters, they were modified as dive bombers with a new wing and with dive brakes. First flown in October 1942 as the North American A-36 Apache, they arrived in Morocco in April 1943 to assist with driving the Afrika Korps out of Africa. The aircraft was very fast at low altitude. It was also accident-prone, achieving the highest casualty rate during training of any USAAF aircraft, and was officially restricted to no more than a 70-degree dive. 43. The Apache did not fly with the RAF, but served with U.S. squadrons in Sicily, Italy, and, by late summer of 1943, was based in India for use over Burma and China. It proved to be an excellent dive bomber and a good fighter. One ace in Italy shot down 5 German fighters. 44. The Royal Navy's Fairey Swordfish and Fairey Albacore torpedo dive bombers and Blackburn Skua fighter bombers were replaced by Fairey Barracuda torpedo dive bombers, which made repeated diving attacks on the German battleship Tirpitz, which lay protected by torpedo nets in a Norwegian fjord during 1944. On 3 April 1944, in Operation Tungsten, 42 aircraft flying from the carriers HMS Victorious and HMS Furious scored 14 hits with 500 lb, 230 kg, and 1,600 lb, 730 kg bombs, and put the battleship out of action for over 2 months. 45. The Soviet Union Armed Forces deployed the Arkhangelsky R-2 from 1940 to 1944, and the Petliakov P-2 from 1941 to 1954. Pacific Theater. United States Navy Curtiss SB-C Heldover dive bomber. The Vultee Vengeance was developed in the U.S. as a private venture dive bomber for export. It first flew in March 1941. It had a zero-incidence wing, which was perfect for vertical dives as there was no lift from wing or tailplane in a dive. But it had to fly in a nose-up attitude to maintain level flight, which made landings difficult. Initial orders were 300 for France, but France fell before they could be delivered. The RAF, with the cancellation of the Hawker Henley and having noted the success of Stukas in Poland, took delivery instead. It was considered too vulnerable to German fighters for use in Europe or North Africa, but large numbers flew in Burma from March 1943. It flew close support for General William Slim's Burma campaign, bombing Japanese supply routes, bridges, and artillery. It operated in the Royal Australian Air Force and Indian Air Force as well as the RAF. Some were held back for the United States Army Air Forces after the attack on Pearl Harbor, but did not see combat. 10. Both the Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN, and the United States Navy invested considerable effort on dive bombers. Japan started the war with a very good design, the carrier-borne HID-3A VAL. As the war progressed, the design became outdated due to its limited speed, due in part to the limited horsepower of its power plant and to the greater drag of its fixed main landing gear, a shortcoming shared by the Stuka. The main American dive bomber, the Douglas SBD Dauntless, had similar performance to the D-3A VAL. From December 1942, the Dauntless was replaced with the faster, but more complex and trouble-prone Curtiss SB-C Heldover. Both American airplanes were ubiquitous, with 6,000 Dauntlesses and over 7,000 Heldovers built. 46. Both the SBD and D-3A were used at Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941. The Japanese sent 54 D-3A VALs carrying 550 lb, 250 kg, bombs to attack parked aircraft at Wheeler Field and Ford Island. A flight of 18 Dauntlesses from USS Enterprise arrived over Pearl Harbor just as the Japanese attacked. 7 were shot down, and many others destroyed on the ground at Marine Corps Air Station U-47. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, Dauntlesses sank the light carrier Shoho and damaged the fleet carrier Shikaku together with Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. 48. On 5 April 1942, the heavy cruisers HMS Cornwall and HMS Dorsetshire were leaving Colombo, Ceylon to join the British Eastern Fleet, but had been spotted by Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. They were attacked by a large number of HID-3As and both were sunk. 49 On 9 April 1942, the Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Hermes, escorted by the destroyer HMS Vampire, were attacked by more than 32 HID-3As and both were sunk shortly before 8 defending RN/FAA ferry Fulmars of 806 Squadron could reach them. The Fulmars shot down 4 D-3As and damaged 2, while losing 2 Fulmars to the more numerous D-3As, 4950. At the Battle of Midway on 4 June 1942, after most of the torpedo bombers had been shot down without a single hit, Dauntlesses from USS Yorktown, CV-5, and USS Enterprise, CV-6, found 4 Japanese carriers in the vulnerable stage of refueling and rearming aircraft for a second strike. The combat air patrol of formidable Mitsubishi A6M0s had been drawn away, chasing torpedo bombers and escorting fighters, leaving a clear sky. Soryu and Kaga were ablaze within 6 minutes, while Akagi, hit only once, suffered fatal damage as the single bomb ignited fuel and bombs in the hangar. 51. Later on 4 June, Yorktown and Enterprise dive bombers inflicted fatal damage on the 4th Japanese carrier Huryu. Within hours, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 4 of its aircraft carriers and many experienced naval airmen, both of which Japan would have difficulty in replacing. Further follow-up raids by SBDs and SBTWAs from Midway and SBDs from Yorktown, Enterprise and USS Hornet, CV-8, on 5-6 June sank the IJN heavy cruiser Makuma and heavily damaged her sister ship Megami and 2 escorting destroyers. 52. The United States Army Air Forces took a version of the Dauntless with a different tailwheel tire and no arrestor hook as the Douglas A-24 Banshee. In crates headed for the Philippines, they were diverted to Australia and operated from Charters Towers in Queensland. The Banshee was unable to contend with Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0s. On 26 July 1942, just 7 Banshees were sent to intercept a Japanese convoy supplying forces occupying New Guinea. 6 were shot down. 13. The Japanese Yokosuka D-4 Waisuisai, codenamed Judy, began to replace the VALs after a very troublesome development on surviving larger Japanese carriers from March 1943. With a sleek fuselage, retracting landing gear, and a powerful licensed Daimler-Benz 601 engine, it could outpace pursuing Grumman F4F Wildcats. To maximize speed and range, the Japanese had dispensed with armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks, which proved to be very costly when the U.S. Navy deployed the new Essex-class aircraft carriers, which each carried 36 of the faster Grumman F6F Hellcats. The Battle of the Philippine Sea on 19-20 June 1944 was a failure in terms of Japanese carriers hit, but the losses of VALs and Judys and their crews were enough to destroy the Japanese Navy's ability to strike by air ever again. 53. Henceforward attacks were mostly confined to kamikaze. 53. The Japanese were now on the defensive. Japan's industrial output dropped from a peak in 1942, while that of the U.S. increased by a quarter in 2 years from 1942 to 1944. Japanese wartime production of bombers of all types was just 16% of the U.S. output. Decline. U.S. Navy add 3 pulls out of dive after dropping a 2,000-pound, 910 kg, bomb on the Korean side of a bridge crossing the Yalu River at Shinwiju, 15 November 1950. When the RAF were attempting to stop the panzers of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps in early 1942, a lack of dive bombers proved to be an impediment. However, the British government's chief scientist, Henry Tizard, formed a panel of experts which recommended using rockets. A rocket has a much flatter trajectory than a bomb, allowing it to be launched with reasonable accuracy from a shallow dive, and could be fitted on existing aircraft. The RAF used them on Hurricanes in June 1942 against Rommel's tanks. The British Army had used rockets against low-flying bombers during the Battle of Britain by enlarging the tube from 2 inches, 51 mm to 3 inches, 76 mm, and fitting high-explosive warheads. It became an anti-tank weapon. 54. The more powerful Hawker Typhoon, originally developed as a fighter, proved even more effective, carrying 8 RP-360LB, 27 kg rockets, and producing a similar effect to a naval destroyer's broadside. 55. On 23 May 1943, a ferry Swordfish destroyed U-752 in the Atlantic, and 5 days later, a Lockheed Hudson of RAF Coastal Command sank U-755 in the Mediterranean, using specialized rockets fitted with iron spikes which were fired at a shallow angle into the sea. Once underwater, they curved upwards and punctured the pressure hull below the waterline, disabling or sinking the submarine. 56. Caltech developed the 5-inch, 130 mm high-velocity aircraft rocket, HVAR, with a 24-pound 11 kg warhead for the U.S. Navy. It was rushed to Europe for use on D-Day and later used by Navy aircraft in the Pacific. 57. By January 1943, American pilots who had been flying in RAF Eagle squadrons before the U.S. entered the war converted from Supermarine Spitfires to Republic P-47 Thunderbolts to form the USAAF 4th Air Fighter Group. At over 4 long tons, 4.1 t, unladen, one of the biggest single-engine fighter bombers of the war, it could carry 10 5-inch, 130 mm HVARs. 58. By late 1944, the RAF was able to hit stationary targets with greater accuracy from greater heights, inflicting far more damage with less risk. On 12 November 1944, 2 5-long-ton, 5.1 t, tallboy bombs were dropped by Avro Lancasters from 25,000 feet, 7,600 m, and hit the German battleship Tirpitz at supersonic speeds, sinking it. The tallboy was developed by Vickers designer Barnes Wallis, who followed it up with the even larger 10-long-ton, 10T, Grand Slam earthquake bomb, which was used to destroy railway viaducts and bridges, targets that could previously only be damaged in diving attacks. Wallis also designed a bomb that bounced across water to destroy the Eder and Moen dams, which needed to be hit repeatedly at the same spot underwater to be breached, but had nets to protect against torpedoes. 59. Pilots in the Pacific later developed a technique of skip bombing which required flying at low level and dropping a spherically nosed conventional bomb onto the sea at a shallow angle, which then bounced back into the air. Although new aircraft could still dive towards their targets, they were no longer optimized for steep diving attacks. Through the pioneering efforts by the Luftwaffe's Fritz X and the USAAF's Azon, controlled trajectory bombs evolved into today's smart bombs. A bomb can be dropped far from a target's air defenses using a guidance system to hit the target, ensuring greater accuracy and minimizing risk to the crew.